Thank you for joining. My name is Joel Montvelisky, and I'm really excited to start this webinar. It's been a while since I haven't done a practice webinar, so it's cool to be back. And let's get started. We're going to be talking today about a topic that came up with one of our practice customers a couple of months back, and that's why we had this idea, but a little bit more in a couple of minutes. So just a little bit about me, in case you've never heard me. I'm guessing that most of you haven't. So my name is Joel. I am a tester. I've been doing testing for about 25 years. It sounds weird, a quarter of a century, but it is what it is. And I've done everything there is to do around testing. I obviously started actually in college as a junior tester, became a team lead, a QA manager, QA director, again, as you grow to large organizations. After a while, I basically became a testing consultant. I wanted to get a little bit more of understanding of other places. And I've been a speaker, blogger, podcaster, whatever you want to do. And again, working a lot out of Israel, where practice headquarters are, but also in the Silicon Valley, a lot in all over Europe, a little bit in Japan, Latin America. I'm actually Costa Rican, if you couldn't tell from my accent. And so all over the world, and that's actually been quite a lot of fun. Today, I'm one of the co-founders of PractiTest. I'm going to be talking about our pretty cool company in a second, where I'm, in a sense, the chief solution architect working, because I'm a tester and we're a test management system, that it's a lot about understanding how can we create a better product, better fitted not only to the needs today, but also to the upcoming needs that are coming for people based on the changes that we see all the time in our industry. And I also get to do a lot of work with our customers, meaning a lot of implementation work, consulting work, how to take the best out of the company. And what I like doing most is watching how people abuse our system, because when someone is abusing your system, that means that there's functionality you need to create. So if you're a practice user and you feel that you're abusing the system, contact me. You have my contact info. We'll see it later on. I try to be active on the community. So I'm in the board of the Association of Software Testing, the IST. There are a couple of projects that I am very much involved around the State of Testing survey. We're releasing, by the way, the report, the State of Testing report. If you haven't heard, it's a report that we have been running in the company in practice together with T-Time with testers for 10 years. It's a very interesting report, goes over what has been happening in the world of testing. Even if you're a tester, meaning try to think where we're going as a group of people, basically as a profession, in a professional way. So it's a pretty cool thing to do. And I also chair the online test conference. Not only do I speak in an international conference, but we have a conference of our own, 100% online. If you haven't heard about it, go ahead and look it up. A little bit about the company that I work with. Promise this is the last you will see. PractiTest, again, I'm 100% biased. I mean, none of us have ugly children. So it's a great company, but really, to put it so, we're trying to create the best QA management system, not because it does everything that other systems do. Yes, we manage test cases and steps and runs and what's not, but we're trying to go deeper into where people are needing it. So we do a lot about what we call test orchestration, where we orchestrate all the automation together with the manual testing. We're very much into how can you release quickly, how can you test in production, and gather all that information. And again, you don't need to trust us. There are quite a lot of pretty cool customers working with us. And just go to the website, check it out, and I'm pretty sure that you like it. And again, feel free to contact me if you have any questions. But let's get over to our topic. And I remember I mentioned talking with a customer, and I'm kind of a science geek in a sense. I've always loved physics. And one of the things that draw me a lot into physics is the different theories. And I remember I was even late high school, back in college, we were learning about chaos theory. And I remember this book about chaos and talking about the butterfly effect. And obviously, if we oversimplify it and completely take it out of context, the butterfly effect says that a small change somewhere will have a bigger impact, an amplified impact later in the process, later in the happening of things. And this is a very important principle to take into account. Sometimes we have small things, small adjustments that we can make to the way that we do stuff, and we underestimate the huge impact it can have later on the process, especially around how can we provide more value to the system. So what we're going to be talking today is about how do we need to pay attention to simple things, annoyingly simple things that can have great impact in the outcome of our testing projects. And I'm going to be talking about that all over, but the outcome of our testing projects, I think that we also need to make a little bit of a switch over. We shouldn't grade our testing projects only on the amount of bugs we found, amount of tests we run, amount of tests that we don't have in production. I think that we need to start focusing more on the business value of our testing process. Are we testing just enough in order to have the desired impact that we want on the application running in production? So all of those type of questions I'm going to be asking them this season, but mostly it's about understanding that it is not rocket science. We're doing testing, unless obviously you're testing rockets. And I do know a couple of people who do it, so they always laugh at me when I say that. It's not rocket science, but it does require attention, planning, and thinking about that up front. So let's actually go ahead and talk about this. And I want to remind everyone, if you have questions, I'm actually looking here on the other screen. There's a chat, there's a Q&A. Go ahead and feel free to ask if something is up to you. So let's actually go and talk about those 7 annoyingly simple things that I believe each one of us should do. I know that I try to push this a lot in my team, one of the things that I do in practice. They're seeing over here, working with our testing team in order to make things better. Okay, so let's start talking about it. The first thing that I couldn't emphasize this enough. It's verifying the scope of what we're doing. And I'm here and talking about making sure that when we're going to be working, I don't care, on a feature, on a user story, on a change, anything, it's not only about what we understand, but verifying that with our peers. In this case, again, the usual suspects are going to be product defining what we need to do, development doing what we believe they should be doing, or the IT team or someone else, and us testing that. And I think that the first thing that we need to do, and it's not trivial, believe me, I've suffered that enough. Let's start by making sure that we have agreement between us, because a lot of time what happens is that we will have a great product team. Again, my director of product in the company actually sits here, and he might be doing, or she might be doing a great job defining that, but there's only so much that you can put in writing. Okay, so let's understand that what that person wrote based on the whole research that was out fits what the developer thought about and fits what we were thinking about. And this might be as simple as having a conversation and saying, hey, yeah, I read it, I went over it, but let's talk about a little bit of things and take a whiteboard. I'm here in my room, and I have a pretty good whiteboard that I use all the time because we use it all the time in order to bounce it. So make sure that there's agreement and understanding. Now, for us as testers, it's understanding completely what is going to happen in our feature and your testing. Because on the one hand, we know that our feature should be doing usually a very simple thing, but you could test it in a limited number of ways. So when we talk about scope, we also talk about the scope of testing. We'll be touching this again in a later point where we talk about what stuff we may sacrifice later on. But let's start by people understand what we're going to be testing. And I've seen it too many times where someone thought, maybe product, maybe R&D, that it was trivial that we were going to test that on multiple devices. And for us, we thought that the feature was limited to the browser. So why do we need to test the devices? Because we were not 100% sure what was going on. So let's make sure that we have a complete understanding of what the feature is expected to do, what is it expected to affect, but also what people want our testing to do in here. So it's a lot about scoping things and making sure that everyone understands. And again, explicitly stating what we're going to be doing, and as much as you can, what you're not going to be doing. Okay? Because as I said, many times we make assumptions, and again, I'm not a native English speaker, so I'm not going to go again and say what assumes means. But I think that when we make assumptions and when we believe that even the person sitting in front of us understands what we mean, it's not as good as if we explicitly put it out. So yes, agile means that we don't want to document a lot. Agile means that we want to make a lot about communication, but communication means making things explicit. And a lot of things I see people thinning on the part of, oh, but I thought it was clear. Oh, but I thought it was obvious. But how could you think that way if this and this is what we have been talking about? It doesn't really matter. We have complicated lives, we have complicated stuff that we're doing all the time. Make sure that that scope, both of what the feature should be doing, what us as a team are going to be doing and testing, is clear, explicit, and agreed upon by everyone. It's relatively simple. Usually 5 minutes is enough, but make sure that you have it. Why? Because if you're going to be testing something, again, it doesn't need to be months, it can be 2 or 3 days. If your peers, if your counterparts only realize after those 3 days that you have done something or haven't done something, maybe just too little too late. The second thing that I want to talk about is priorities, okay? And specifically having clear priorities. This is especially important when we're working on multiple things in parallel. And again, who doesn't, okay? On a sterile scenario, I'm only working on one user story, and when I'm done, I'm going to go back to the batch and take another one and start working on that. But you know what? It doesn't work that way. We're going to be working on 2 or 2 things, and something's going to come in the middle because a very strategic customer is asking for something. We need to make sure that we have a clear priority, including timelines, of what has to be tested and when do I need to be done by that. Especially, again, in my company, I'm guessing that for many of you, it's the same. Customers are waiting for a feature, and a deal might be waiting for a feature. And especially, again, we're right now in April, but towards the end of the quarter, that becomes more and more. It has to be, again, understood. And us as testers, it's a matter of having priorities. Why? Because we need to understand, as I was saying multiple times, there are going to be business needs and business constraints. What's a business need? Hey, we have a large deal waiting for that. And this is the last thing on the place, and I don't want it to fall because of that. What's a constraint? Might be the same. It might be, hey, if we don't close this by the end of the week, they're going to go to our competitors and do something else. Or I'm working right now on a specific functionality of the system that we're working for a very large customer, and they need it in order to start the migration early next week. So I know that if I'm not going to be having that feature tested and ready by the end of the week, it's not going to be relevant, or we're going to get a lot of noise out of that. So make sure that you understand the constraints of the business, not only the constraints of development. Oh, I want you to test this because it's more complex. Guys, we're not testing for developers. We're testing for business, okay? Even though we're working with developers, we're testing because of the business that we're being done. Again, what you want to avoid as much as possible, and trust me on this one, it's not a nice place to be. You don't want to become the source of a political conflict or the scapegoat of a political conflict. You don't want to be that person who's, when they're closing the quarter and your sales team is going to come out and say, hey, we didn't meet our target because the testing team or the development team were not able to release something. Okay, or again, you know how politics works on the company. I don't need to go into that, but it's as simple as making sure that you as a tester understand what are your priorities and what are those constraints. Okay, don't assume them, especially when you're going to timelines, because if not, you're going to find yourself, someone's going to knock on your door at 5 p.m. and tell you, hey, I need that until tomorrow. And you're going to find yourself working until 10 p.m. unnecessarily because you could have done differently. Okay, remember, we're providing a service. We need to understand how to do it. And in case that you're not going to be able to do it, which are the contingencies here? And what I mean by here is you have a limited amount of resources, a limited amount of time. If someone comes and tells me, hey, this feature is more important, then I need to be very clear and say yes. So I'm going to be pushing this one there, and I'm not going to be in that deadline, and have someone who can make that call, make the call. Okay. Yeah, they will get mad at you that you cannot do both in parallel, but they will be madder at you if you put them behind the wall and against the wall and they don't even have the ability to make that decision. Okay. So again, have clear priorities more than anything else around timeline. When do they need your testing, until when? So they're part of that discussion, that conversation. Now, as I said, if I said that I'm a physics bluff, I'm also a history bluff. I love history. I listen to tons of podcasts, and if you want to get recommendations about history podcasts, send me an email. I'll send you more than a couple of those that I'm hearing all the time. But I think that we underestimate the power of project history. Okay, if a similar story was already developed in the past, let's actually make sure that we learn from that. And I know that personally I have done this more times than I'm proud about talking about it, but we usually tend to commit the same mistakes over and over and over again because we said, hey, it's not going to happen again, right? We're not that dumb. And at the end of the day, yeah, we actually are. So I think that one of the things that we need to make sure to do is not to waste our time. A lot of times we're going to be running, we have this new feature or this addition to the feature that we have, and we start thinking, okay, what test cases do we need to write from scratch? You'd be surprised how many of those test cases are things that you can just modify a little bit, okay, especially around automation. Obviously, manual test cases, sometimes it's easier just to write a couple of new test cases, especially if you're going to be doing exploratory testing, than just modifying the ones that you already have. But as we have more and more automation, it becomes more of a matter of how can I take what I already have and add 2 or 3 steps to cover that. Now, if you wrote your automation intelligently, then it's going to be easier for you to make modifications here and just expand your automation path in order to cover that new part of the functionality. Sometimes it's harder than it looks, but many times it's not. The idea is to try to understand how can we do that up front. Why? Because if you have a feature that is being modified and you can add it to your automation suite instead of testing it manually, you already saved a lot of time. And if it's going to be an addition to something, look at the test that it's already there, check how much can you modify from that. Now, there's a flip side to that coin. If you start adding ad hoc changes to test cases, they become a little bit more fragile. They can become less stable. So again, it's not clear cut, but try to understand how much you can reuse the stuff that you're doing. And again, you will be able to save a lot of time, a lot of effort if you do that. Another thing that it's incredibly important is the notion of escaping defects. And I'm not sure if all organizations, in my experience, a little bit less than half organizations actually have a clear definition of escaping defects and a clear cataloging or of escaping defects. Escaping defects are those defects, not necessarily that you didn't catch as part of the process, are defects that actually were reported from the field. And why is there a distinction here? If I found a bug as part of the development process, and I explicitly decided that it's not a good enough bug, an important enough bug in order to be solved before we release the product, so we release the product with that bug inside of it, and then it's being reported from the field and we fix it because it was reported from the field, then that becomes an escaping defect. Okay, regardless if you found it or not. Obviously, if you didn't find it in your testing process, you found it only in production, that's a simple definition for escaping defect. But even if you found it in your development process and you didn't decide to fix it, someone reports it from outside and you fix it because it was reported from outside, then that is an escaping defect. And why is that important? Because we're going to be talking about that later, especially around DevOps. There are some bugs that I explicitly prefer to fix only if they were found after I released the product, but that has to be a decision. Many times we just don't have good enough testing, that becomes a escaping defect, or we found the bug, we had a bad definition of whether the bug has to be fixed or not, and at the end of the day, we had to fix it because our users were actually complaining about it, and so you want to avoid those, okay? And the best way to avoid those is if you look at the history of the bugs that were found internally and externally, and make sure to solve them as part of your process. Now, in addition to that, and around everything that we've talked about here, it's a lot about learning from the good and bad assumptions that we made as part of our work. And again, I've been part of many projects where we thought, oh, customers are going to be liking this. And so we worked on that, we released it, and boom, on the face, people didn't like it and we got their feedback. So it's about learning about that, or making the assumption that if there's a small bug in here, they will be okay with that and then not, or no, we need to make sure that the system is extremely clean because if there's a bug in here, they will kill us, and then you realize that they don't. So let's make sure that we learn from the good and bad assumptions of our previous work, especially because it can either save us a lot of emergencies later in the process, or it can save us a lot of work in this side of the process if we can stop doing some of the test cases because they're not really needed. Okay, so it's a lot about learning from history, and it's usually, again, a matter of 10 minutes, 20 minutes, a little bit of research, talking to people, and you will have all of that upfront. Now, another point, and this one I have been doing for a while, but I do find that many of the people that I talk around in the industry don't really do it, and that is around defining minimal threshold. Okay, and I think that the issue here is that later on, when push comes to shove, when we're closer to the release date, when we're already late, we will need to make compromises on what we're going to be testing. Okay, what we want to do, we want to make that call of what defines the minimal scope when we have a cool head in our shoulders, when we can actually think about it and talk about it, when we can reason on that. Okay, so it's better before you start testing to define what we will call the minimal testing scope of execution. Okay, it doesn't usually, you have that minimal scope, it's really your minimal scope, and you add more if you have more time for that, but make sure that you basically define what's going to be my red line. And it doesn't mean that we cannot cross that red line, but it means that if we cross that red line, people need to understand that this is a decision that we made. So it's more about understanding what's going to be initially there and making sure that we can agree upon that. Now, who has to agree upon that? It depends. I know that in many places it's going to be the development team, the product team, sometimes the sales team. A lot of times, especially if we're talking about that kind of entrepreneurship approach where, oh, we're doing this feature because it's going to save us a deal. What is the minimal feature? Because maybe you can feature flag the stuff and only release it to a couple of customers, but you want to make sure that this and this functionality, this and this test have been done. So make sure that everyone agrees upon that. Why? Because when you're going to be making the compromises, you want to be able to raise the red flags and bring people into the conversation. I usually advise people to categorize your testing into 3 options: the nice to test, the should test, and the must test. Obviously, the minimal is the must test. The should test are the ones that, if I want to have a clear conscience and sleep better at night, I will do that kind of should test case scenarios. And the nice to test, usually we don't even do it. Okay, but it's those test cases that if we can, we have time, if we have an intern, we'll let him play with the system and run those tests in here. Okay, or if we have spare time, we will do it. But you want to make sure that the must tests are going to be done, and the should test, at least a large part of them have been done in here, and define them. Again, make sure that everyone understands, agrees upon that. And it will be easier for you to then make this a conscious decision instead of having here a hijack of your process and making sure that, again, you're not doing what you actually want. Next in line here is plan ahead to test in production. And I'm realizing a fantasy here. I have been wanting to have this meme for a long time. Testing is for whims, real men testing production. And you know, that's what Chuck Norris would obviously say. But let's talk seriously here. Especially if you're working on a DevOps team, especially if you're working on a SaaS environment, where you are the owner of your environment, which means that if some bugs are found after your product has been released, it's actually really quick, really simple, and almost harmless to fix them in production. Whereas if I was to test every single scenario, it would take too much time, and so we would delay the release. So we need to understand which are the test cases that can be left to run in production in order to shorten our release cycle. Because remember, I'm pretty sure that you work on planet Earth. All projects on planet Earth are usually running late, and so you want to test as little as possible in order to provide the best possible scenario here. So make sure that you have a clear understanding of the type of bugs that can be fixed in production. That means, again, that first of all, they're not really harmful. They might be a little bit annoying, but people won't leave you because of them. Second of all, it's very easy to understand that they're happening because you have good monitoring, you have extremely good alerts, and you're able to understand they're happening, and obviously understand they're happening. So it's not only about the alerts, but also to being able to catalog and to understand the alerts. And third of all, that you can fix it in production, because many times you might have a minor bug that will take, I don't know, 2 days to be fixed. Those are not the ones, especially if they're going to be unknown. So try to understand how that works. It's not so much a matter of the specific user story. It's usually a matter of your product. For each product, for each company, for each monitoring policies that you have, some areas will be easier to work with in production than others. Okay, and that is also something that changes over time, but make sure that you understand what is there. And again, have validations after your product has been deployed, because it's not enough to say, oh, if there's a bug, I'm going to be hearing that from my customers. usually by the time that enough customers send their complaints to support were able to understand that it is a bug, we're able to raise it, understand and raise it, maybe half a day, maybe a day, maybe 2 days pass, and it's going to become harder and harder for you to do it. So you need to have good validations that are going to be run the moment that the product has been deployed. Sometimes going to be to having automation in production, sometimes going to be having validation in production, sometimes going to be, at least for us, it's a lot of monitoring. Okay, but you need to have it placed and make sure that you are able to communicate and validate this decision with stakeholders, because as I said, those assumptions, if this is a bug that can happen in production, it's not always clear cut. Again, maybe your feature flagging this feature, and so the specific customer getting it, it's going to be very lenient with you. Maybe we already pissed off a couple of customers on our last release. We need to be extra careful this time. It's something that is going to be changing all the time. So make sure that you can validate what can be tested in production, what has to be tested pre-production. And I think that if you ask me, this is one of the most interesting challenges of testers today. Okay, the conscious decision of what do I have to test before production, what can I test in production, and what can I just keep testing, and if there's a bug, someone will tell me about it. It has become a critical question, especially when we're trying to release products as quickly as possible. And again, planet Earth, I don't know of any organization that is not short on time and resources in order to do it. Okay, point number 6 here. It's critical, and it might be a little bit less trivial when we said annoyingly simple, but it's still not rocket science, and that is getting customer-facing feedback. Now, depending on your company, you have a customer support team, maybe a customer success team, maybe you have professional services. Usually, most of us work with sales team. There are a lot of people who are facing customers day in, day out. It's important to talk to them in order to understand if there are things in your test you should be doing better. Okay, so get information from, go to every one of these teams. And again, we might call them differently in different places and organizations, but you surely have them. Maybe you're even part of that team. A lot of places have testing teams doing part of the support work. Get information about the areas that current customers are finding painful. Okay, if I'm already very annoyed by the way that the system is managing the login system or the reporting system, you know that that is a part that has to be extra tested because people are not going to be able to receive a lot of bugs in there. Make sure that not only it's about what's painful, try to understand usage patterns, validate your main path scenarios with them. A lot of times we find ourselves testing areas that people are not really using, or maybe they're using, not really complaining. And we're blinded about specific areas that we thought were not really important, but as it turns out, a lot of customers really, really like it and are using them quite a lot. So you have usage patterns, you have main path scenarios, you have all sorts of assumptions about where and how you need to do the testing. You'd be amazed how much feedback these other teams, these organizations are really interested in understanding what you're doing and are also happy to give you a lot of feedback there. Okay, so it's really a shame if you're not going to be able to, first of all, seek that feedback, but also use that feedback internally. And I think that more important than anything else is to look for information that goes against your current assumptions, because especially if you have been working in a team for X amount of time, as we work more and more somewhere, then we make assumptions. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, but we need to look for people who will basically kind of shift our assumptions a little bit and make us look at our product on a more, let's say, realistic, updated, better way than what we're doing right now. And again, we have people who can do that really, really quickly and really, really. The last point that I think that it's really important, and this one is really extremely easy to do, is to start testing before your development is done working with the system. And this is something that I don't know why I don't see it more. And I know that I started implementing this as policy in practice about 2 or 3 years ago. And it works wonders. And it's very simple. Don't wait. If you have a separate testing team, even if within your agile team you have separate testing functions and development functions, don't wait for the developer to be done before you start running your testing. And what do I mean by that? Well, the simplest thing you can do is to set up informal sessions where the testing function, I don't want to call him tester for, again, on purpose, the testing function, the person who's assigned testing will sit with that developer and just run some informal testings over there. It's as simple as tell the developer, hey, can you show me the feature? Can you walk me through that? What you have, it doesn't have to be done. And then I start asking those annoying questions. Hey, wait a second. Are you going to be validating the password? Why am I not seeing this button in here? A lot of those assumptions might have been missed. And so you can provide feedback. It's not only about providing feedback. Maybe it's bugs that you're finding right now. Maybe it's the interpretation of what was the best flow to follow here, because usually it's not 100% defined, that you're providing feedback here. If it's being done as the development is taking place, then it's easier to correct what's going on in here. It's easier to come and say, hey, you know what? You did it that way. I don't think it's the best way. Why don't we bring product into the conversation? Maybe we'll be able to resolve this before it's even done and more time is wasted. Important thing is that do it while the product is still being cooked. Don't wait until it's already been. Now, obviously, it's finding bugs and fixing them earlier, but I think that no less important is that after we do this more than a couple of times, we start generating a testing mindset in our developers, especially in organizations where the testing functions are done separately from the development functions, AKA where we have testers and developers. It's a best way to make developers understand our testing mindset. And you'll see how developers themselves start testing a little bit more. Why? Because developers don't like having bugs being found on them after the product is done, meaning it's not their enjoyment factor in here. They don't like us to see us suffer. They simply don't know a lot of times how to approach testing in their product. So if we do it enough times with them, then they will start working better. And even if not, then it will bring those points of discord before the product is done and when they can still be fixed without delaying or not delaying too much the system. So these are, as I mentioned, the very simple things that we can do. But I think that more important than that, it's about our approach, okay? It's about making sure that everything that we're going to be doing, and this should be annoyingly simple as well. We're going to be applying critical thinking in here. It's not always doing what we're told to do because this is the way that we have been working. Ask yourself, hey, is this the best way of doing things? This is the best way my application should be behaving. It's about asking yourself those questions and looking for answers in a critical way, okay? Don't accept that every answer because maybe someone higher up the food chain gave it to you. Don't be afraid to ask those questions, especially if something doesn't make sense. It's okay to say, I don't really understand what you meant by that. Can you explain a little bit further? Maybe I'm missing something in here. Try to consult with people with different knowledge and experience, as I mentioned a number of times. Go to your sales team, go to your support team, go to your customer success team. Share with them, ask with them the stuff that you're doing. Be very open to be wrong, okay? As I tell this to my team all the time, I'm the happiest person to be corrected. If you think that I'm doing something wrong, your place is to come and tell me how to do it better. Not only am I not going to get mad at you, I'm going to appraise you better because you're actually making my life better and my work better. And I think that it's also looking both at the long run and the short run solutions. And it's not only looking at the long run. I had this conversation a couple of days ago with someone in my team. Sometimes it's not about doing the stuff that is right on the long run. Sometimes we have short run needs and it's okay to work on them, but it's more importantly to understand which of the needs are more important right now. Again, we're going back to prioritization. Maybe I need to do something quick and dirty right now because that's what it's expected of me. Again, we're working on the agile process and we're not releasing, not all of us at least, rocket software or surgical software. And a lot of times, especially around e-commerce, it's about having something that is good enough to be released right now in order to validate and continue to work later. It's about having that type of agility in your mind in order to find the best solution. So with that in mind, I want to remind you of something. And I've been using this slide in a number of presentations, and I think that it's a very important one because the message is still important here. We're not talking only about testing. testing is not important. This is what we do, but this is what we do in order to actually have a deliverable. It's not even about the quality of what we're doing, okay? Quality is not an absolute definition. It's about the business, okay? I think that one of the most important mindset changes that we need to do as testing professionals is to understand that we're providing a service, and the type of service, the definition of the service will fall on our customer. Our customer is not our end user. Our customer is our internal customer who's going to tell us how can we help them to make their work better. Sometimes it's the user, not all the time. Okay, so remember, it's about the business. How can we help them to do it better? And all the time making sure that we're aligned with them. So with that, I want first of all to thank you that you're still with me here. And if anyone has any questions, I will be more than happy to answer them here in the chat or the Q&A. If not, then you have here the way to contact me. My email is here. I don't answer every email. Sorry, I don't answer very fast, but I do answer every email. So if something you want to comment, ask or suggest, feel free to do it. And I'll be happy to help.